Hello, everyone. Welcome back to another live stream, and thank you so much for tuning in for another show. Israel clearly began the operation that they were speaking about to occupy the Gaza city, but without any declaration, and so that Benjamin Netanyahu wouldn't be able to announce all of the failures that he had. Benjamin Netanyahu is also already now preparing the scene for him to declare that he couldn't continue with this operation because there was resistance coming from within the Israeli army. Talks in the Israeli media about more conflicts between the top leadership of the Israeli army and Benjamin Netanyahu. But Israel, in the meantime, is carrying out an operation. We're going to talk all about that in this live stream, and also the recent escalation coming with the publication of the Palestinian resistance of recent operations where they were destroying the Israeli terror forces inside of the Gaza Strip. Let's begin with the situation in Gaza. Yesterday, Israel killed over 51 people, and today over 30 people were killed in a campaign primarily targeting buildings in the areas in Gaza City and surrounding Gaza City, in particular in Al Zaytun neighborhood. More people are getting killed next to the 8 points, and the genocide is still ongoing. However, the reports from the people on the ground, despite Israel killing the majority of the journalists who are reporting about the situation in Gaza, are talking about Israeli attacks that are deliberately targeting buildings. So why is Israel targeting buildings exactly, and what are they trying to avoid here? Well, this targeting is a typical Israeli campaign. As we can see, these were some of the images that came out in the footage from Gaza. Civilian buildings, clearly, from areas where there is no fighting between the resistance fighters in Israel, by the way. All of the combat scenes that you see from the Palestinian resistance, they're usually in areas where the people were already evacuated. But Israel is targeting whatever's remaining from buildings in Gaza. Why is that, and how is it in line with the campaign that Benjamin Netanyahu is doing in Gaza? Well, the Israeli army, they did not approve this intense operation that Benjamin Netanyahu demanded from them, simply because they're incapable. Primarily, really, they have many other reasons, risking the lives of the Israeli prisoners of war and all of that too. But Netanyahu wants to show that he is actually doing something in Gaza so that people know that something is coming. For example, you have this destruction of these buildings here. Israel is carrying out more strikes in areas in Al Zaytun neighborhood, paving the way, according to them, for Division 99, and according to several reports coming from Israel, Division 99, one of the biggest divisions in the Israeli terror army, to go and invade, or to at least show that they are about to invade. Why? Because, well, initially they said they need 250,000 to go and fight, as if they have this number, by the way. Then other reports said 100,000, but they don't even have 100,000, the second number that they were talking about. Therefore, they are resorting to these operations without declaring that they began. Because if they declare that they began an operation, that means people would be anticipating and expecting something really big. Netanyahu declared that he's going to occupy Gaza. People are going to tell him, well, Mr. Netanyahu, where is the occupation in Gaza? Can you show us that occupation? Why is he trying to avoid that now? Well, because he failed in every single military campaign during the genocide in the past 2 years. That failed, like most recently, the general's plan in North Gaza before the January ceasefire, and later on, Gideon's chariots, which also failed miserably. As a matter of fact, Israel is returning in this campaign that they're talking about now to some places that they were in during Gideon's chariots and withdrew from in a very limited manner, not in a very big manner, and not with many forces too, because they are incapable at the end of the day, but they are still capable of targeting innocent civilians and destroying buildings because they enjoy the impunity and there's no one to deter them globally and inside, apart from the Palestinian resistance and anyone actively participating, like Yemen, for example. However, this isn't stopping, of course, the Palestinian resistance, who just released images of operations during what they call Operation David Stones in Gaza for several weeks. They had operations for several weeks, and they published a compilation of these videos from inside of the Gaza Strip. And in the operations, the Palestinian resistance clearly is showing levels that we haven't seen before of targeting the Israeli genocide forces with sniper action against the genocide troops, with Yasin 105 again, pre-made ambushes by the Palestinian resistance, and all of these operations are taking place in the areas of Az-Zaytun neighborhood. Some of them were in Shuja'iyya, like for example, this one is in a street called Al-Mansura Street in the Shuja'iyya neighborhood, clearly targeting the Israeli genocide soldiers in broad daylight and also recording it from multiple angles. Israel, from its part, it did not release, of course, any of the footage that the Palestinian resistance did, but they did declare that certain operations took place. These are the operations that Israel didn't even speak about. Again, some of them in At-Tufah neighborhood, some of them in Ash-Shuja'iyya, against the Israeli genocide forces, whether they are in buildings, as we can see here with the Yasin 105, they're targeting them in buildings, again, multiple places with complex weapons too. And the significant thing about this is the fact that these are areas where Israel had presence in for an extremely long time. So we're talking about areas that suffered months of starvation, constant Israeli occupation presence. This is another 105 targeting, looks like an Israeli bulldozer or an IDF vehicle here. Yet despite that, the Palestinian resistance was extremely active in all of those areas in a very, very intense way too, targeting the Israeli genocide forces wherever they see them. Now, from an Israeli perspective, they're trying to avoid what happened here. This is another one targeting a bulldozer as well. They're trying to avoid these scenes by not having this invasion that they're talking about. And again, all of this footage, by the way, is just recent footage that came from the Palestinian resistance of multiple operations. Israel is trying to avoid these scenes now by not having an operation directly on the ground immediately, at least, or in a very quick manner. That's why they're having these attacks from over the ground inside of Gaza so far. But the Palestinian resistance, up until the last moment, and some of these videos were up to several days back, where Israeli forces were in Gaza, they were targeting them very heavily. Now, this is what's causing Benjamin Netanyahu a lot of problems, because he's declaring that he's going to occupy. What they're doing is having intense attacks against civilian buildings, showing in a way that they're trying to pave the way for this bigger operation, because they need that leverage, right, by attacking civilians against the Palestinian negotiator. And we're going to get to the negotiations in a bit. But before that, things are becoming more and more tense internally. Why? More people are protesting in Israel, but now there's a very large threat of an economic shutdown from the whole population. Already, many businesses in Israel started to shut down, but there's a really large expected protest tomorrow on Saturday, and intense national action expected on Sunday. What are the people exactly preparing? They're preparing a whole shutdown economically of the whole country. They're trying to send a message to the decision makers, and organizations within the country are going to strike too, are going to carry out a strike. So it's not just the people, not just the families of the prisoners of war. No, a very large strike that's due to start taking place on Sunday. Although so far we have seen that some businesses internally already started the strike. So the strike is taking effect now. But they're calling tomorrow a stop day. They're going to actually try and completely stop the war. And what that is causing internally is some people who were not really active so far in relation to protests, especially the relatives, some relatives of the prisoners of war, because they're split. Some families of POWs actually support Netanyahu's vision by carrying out an operation and continuing this operation up until they, as Netanyahu says, eliminate the Palestinian resistance. But the majority of them want this to stop. The others, their argument is, well, if we do take them out now and we didn't really achieve the goals of the war, that means we are at risk in the future of something else happening, which is similar to what happened to us before. But the prisoners of war and the majority of the population want to stop the war because, from their perspective, any further day of an Israeli action in Gaza and any additional hour where there is no ceasefire is a risk, or carries a risk, to the lives of the prisoners of war inside of the Gaza Strip. Now, in recent days, there have been talks that Netanyahu, and there was actually a confirmation coming from Benjamin Netanyahu, that he will only be open to an all-out deal. There were similar statements coming recently from Benjamin Netanyahu saying that we will only agree to a deal if it's all in exchange for all, full ceasefire deal, no kind of half deals here and there. But they're talking about a change in the Hamas position, negotiating team officials. And they're saying that the change in Hamas's position may allow a return to the talks on a phased deal. The defense establishment supports a partial deal, however, saying we must save whoever we can. They're also confirming that there's a huge burden. We are aware of the great burden on the servicemen, and we are making an effort to adapt the plan to this. Not just adapt the plan, but also not carry out any plan that they want because they are simply incapable. However, some people within the negotiating delegation, unlike what Benjamin Netanyahu is saying, and clearly with Benjamin Netanyahu's knowledge, they're saying that a partial deal is on the table, another partial deal is on the table, and it should be agreed if offered. So these are the people who are sent by Benjamin Netanyahu. Although Netanyahu is saying that, no, we just want a full-out deal, some in the negotiating delegation, and all of whom, by the way, are appointed by Benjamin Netanyahu, none of them are like people who aren't directly appointed by him under his thumb. They're saying, no, there's actually an option here for a temporary deal too. Why are they saying that? They're saying that because the gap is so big between Israel and Hamas on the demands to end the war, that we need to have a temporary deal. And that gap started to appear and started to intensify after Israel not only broke repeated ceasefires and breached previous ceasefires multiple times, but also added impossible conditions to the ceasefire talks, only for Benjamin Netanyahu to extend the genocide to suit his political interests and self-interests in this genocide. However, the people who are talking and have been appointed by Netanyahu are saying that the gap is too big. Israel is saying they need to be disarmed, they need to be expelled, no Palestinian Authority should be there, not the West Bank and not Gaza. Both of them want to destroy us in their ways respectively, in their own ways respectively. we need to have an entity that would want peace with us, that would want to live in peace next to us. Imagine which person from Gaza would want to live in peace with Israel after all of this destruction. But what is that showing us? That's showing us that there is a very big gap. There's a very big gap between what Benjamin Netanyahu is saying, and there's also a difference between what is being reported from the mediators and the people participating in the talks in relation to the ceasefire itself. Now, moving on to Lebanon. In Lebanon, another Israeli-American plan is taking place. And this plan is disarm Hezbollah, disarm the Lebanese resistance. Ali Larijani, the senior security figure in the establishment in Iran, went for a visit to Lebanon, and he met with the president, he met with the prime minister, and he met with senior figures, and he met with also the Hezbollah leaders, and he met with the Amal leaders, which is one of the largest also ally to Hezbollah. He was told by the Lebanese president, no groups allowed in Lebanon, no armed groups are allowed in Lebanon. That's it. We need to hand the weapons to the state. He heard similar comments from the Lebanese prime minister as well, telling him that, I'm sorry, Mr. Larijani, all of the weapons need to be in the hands of the Lebanese state. All of a sudden, okay. What did Larijani respond? Larijani said, you need to appreciate the fact that you have a resistance that is protecting Lebanon, and Lebanon is sovereign. It's entitled to have its own decisions, and things should happen in coordination and agreement with both sides inside of Lebanon. At the end of the day, all of this rushed move to disarm the Palestinian resistance is coming from pressure, due to pressure from the American side and from the Israeli side, clearly, and that has been reported by multiple people and figures inside of Lebanon who are not necessarily aligned with the Lebanese resistance. Tom Barak is coming with demands and with deadlines to end of 2025 for the Lebanese resistance to hand its weapons. Then there was a response. Can Hezbollah actually hand in the weapons, and how and why? And is it going to be as a strategy with a joint defense strategy? No, the Lebanese government isn't saying as a part of a strategy, or, we'll take care of it, or we'll keep the secrecy, or anything of the sort. They're just saying hand in the weapons. This is what's causing Hezbollah, of course, the other side, to be suspicious of this move. Why are you asking us to hand in the weapons? We told you we're willing to hand in the weapons to the state so long as there is a strategic coordination. There are negotiations between us on how these weapons are protected, how we are able to keep the deterrence of Lebanon in the face of the Israeli aggression. And also, is this now the time to talk about disarming when you have Israel occupying parts of Lebanon and attacking us and killing our people? Is this the priority? There was a speech coming from the Lebanese Secretary General, Sheikh Naim Qasim. Says the resistance will not surrender its weapons, and we are confident of victory. He came out this time with one of the most straightforward answers. There are American-Israeli orders for the Lebanese authorities to hand the arms of the resistance to those sides. But the Lebanese prime minister is saying, no, they're lying. We're not actually going to hand in the weapons to Israel and the United States. We're just going to take the weapons. Take the weapons and do what with them exactly? Recycle them? Dismantle them and use them as renewable energy? What are you going to do with them? Clearly, there's something here that's backed by Israel and the United States. It's been obvious. But the statement that came from the Lebanese Hezbollah Secretary General spoke about plans also to start a civil war. That these people who are looking to take our weapons without any talk from us, without any strategy, without nothing in place, no talks about how things are going. All they want is to implement the demands of the American and Israeli sides so that Lebanon is stripped from every single strategic deterrence against the Israeli terrorists. And we're not going to hand in our weapons, and we don't want civil war, but if it is forced upon us, we are ready for it, and we will be victorious. And it will basically be a war of martyrdom for us. So Israel's delusions, American delusions, are over in Lebanon. It isn't going to work simply by the statements that came from the Lebanese Secretary General. Now, some people might not be aware of the situation in Lebanon and how it works exactly. Iran, not only did they offer Lebanon to arm the Lebanese army, they offered them electricity. They offered to help Lebanon in relation to its financial problems, but they haven't been allowed to do so. Why? Because of that same pressure coming from the United States and also from Israel. They don't want any influence coming from Iran. Influence, right? Even when Iran tries to help them with things to do with their infrastructure or with finance or anything of the sort. Why did Lebanon, or why did the Lebanese army refuse this help from Iran? And why did they also refuse Iran's proposal to arm them? Because if it's about the Lebanese army being powerful and having deterrence in the face of Israel, Iran told them, we will arm you directly. We will send you the weapons so that the Lebanese state can be powerful against the Israeli aggression. But still, the Lebanese authorities refused. Why did they refuse? It's because they are implementing an Israeli-American plan. The president, Joseph Aoun, Prime Minister Nawaf Salam, and all of the other corrupt leaders in the Lebanese establishment. And that is becoming evident the more time goes by, more and more evident. Why? Because how can you talk? Okay, let's make it straightforward. Anyone who asks to disarm a resistance movement fighting an occupation while that occupation exists and still poses a threat is a traitor. It's very straightforward. Like the people who are asking the Palestinian resistance, anyone who, even if it's Palestinian, because the Palestinian Authority in the West Bank is saying that. Palestinian President Abu Mazen is saying that they need to disarm. He actually also went to Lebanon to sign an agreement to disarm the Lebanese movements inside of Lebanon. That was the Palestinian president. Imagine the level of corruption that's happening here and the level of depravity. How can you go and ask the only side that has any sort of capability in an already such an uneven equation, an uneven situation, to go and disarm in front of the most brutal and barbaric and abhorrent genocidal entity on earth murdering children? Isn't it your priority to apply pressure on the other side to disarm? Isn't it a priority to ask to inspect their suspicious nuclear program? Isn't it your priority to ask for peacekeeping process inside of the occupied Palestinian territories to make sure that a genocidal entity perpetrating a genocide, committing a genocide, as confirmed by the international courts with a wanted war criminal, wanted for justice, leading the country, is that not your priority? And is your priority to disarm the only movement standing up against them? And that doesn't mean you need to have an agreement on everything. But during the time of war, you don't open your mouth against the only side confronting this genocide, let alone ask to disarm them. So the people who want to disarm Lebanon are the same people who want to disarm the Palestinian side, by the way. And the same people who want Iran to also remove its strategic capabilities, only for Israel to enjoy the constant impunity and have what they say freedom of air, travel, freedom of airstrikes, freedom of naval. They call that the freedom of navigation and freedom of movement. In Israel, they use this term. We must ensure that we have freedom of movement in the Lebanese airspace and in the Syrian airspace and over the whole world. To them, that's freedom of movement. And the other side, they need to be stripped of any point of power. And that was a message that was received very strongly internally in Lebanon, because now they're understanding that we're faced with total resistance here to disarm. But there are dangerous scenarios moving forward. What are these dangerous scenarios? Well, number one, the Lebanese authorities can start taking very stupid measures to try and enforce that through the armed forces. So politically motivated moves, and put in the army in the face of the Lebanese resistance. That would be a catastrophic situation. There are several reasons why this might fail. There might be an inner kind of opposition from within the Lebanese army, because many of them are the sons of Lebanon, and many of them are supporters of the resistance too. But some of them might actually accept, and that could lead Lebanon into another civil war. Another option would be, well, it can go ahead and they can have an understanding later on. The third option would be either as a result of the second option or in addition to it, an Israeli attack against Lebanon. Why? Because Israel would come and tell the Lebanese authorities, you did not adhere to the agreements that we had with you. Although again, go and analyze those agreements that they had with them even, or resolution 1701 that they had in 2006, and the fact that they were speaking about arms south of the Litani River. And again, despite Israel having operations in that area, they don't know what's hidden or what's other strategic places and what have you. They know certain things that they found. But they would come and tell the Lebanese authorities, you failed in disarming Hezbollah, or you reached an understanding with Hezbollah that they're not going to be disarmed inside of Lebanon. Therefore, we're going to have more attacks against Lebanon. And then some of the same treacherous elements within the Lebanese authorities would blame that on the Lebanese resistance and tell them, look, because you refused to disarm, now we have a bigger war inside of Lebanon. But the sound of the fighting, the sound of the battlefield would be higher at that time than the sound of the politicians speaking, because the Lebanese resistance would be engaged again in combat with Israel. That at that point would be likely, or would very likely lead Iran to participate. Why? Because with the fall of the previous Syrian regime and the channel and the flow of arms more freely to Hezbollah, they might feel that they need to have direct support from them. In addition, Israel is already now preparing for a second campaign with Iran. More and more people are talking about the fact that Iran, they still have their strategic capabilities, and they still have the nuclear technology. As a matter of fact, figures close to the Iranian authorities, not in an official way, but close to the Iranian authorities, say that Iran, from an establishment perspective and from a capability perspective, if they want a nuclear weapon, they can convert anything they have to a nuclear weapon within an hour. And that's no surprise. Israel has been speaking about the fact that Iran was like on the verge of having a nuclear weapon since the 80s. That's not something new. But now this is something that's being confirmed more and more by the people who are close to the establishment in Iran. And also parliamentarians in Iran, members of parliament, are speaking about the fact that they need to change doctrine. That doctrine has to be changed simply because they're being faced with a constant threat that is against their existence as a country. You know, Israel will tomorrow tell you, well, that's the border of the greater Israel. Benjamin Netanyahu said the other day, he's very spiritually connected to the idea of the greater Israel. It already includes parts of Egypt, all of Lebanon, a large chunk of Syria, and Saudi Arabia and Iraq as well, all the way to the Gulf. All of that is problematic. And from an Iranian perspective, they would view that as a direct threat against them. Similar threats came from Iranian officials, by the way, that Israel is also planning for an operation. And next time, if they carry out an attack, our attack will be more intense than any previous attack that happened before against Israel. And these were the main things that I wanted to share with you in this live stream. I'll open the space up for a few comments or participation from the community. Thank you so much, everyone, for tuning in. Michael McIntyre, the Virus 455, and Michael, again, thank you very much for your contribution. Stephen Kelly, will Muslim countries attack Israel if Iran is attacked? Well, we saw that. We saw what they didn't do when Iran was attacked. Iran had to carry out its own acts of self-defense, and they carried it out in a brilliant manner. They targeted Israel heavily to a level where Benjamin Netanyahu asked for a rope from Trump, and he handed him that rope with this theatrical attack against the Fordo facilities, only for them to end this operation and declare, a ceasefire, because they achieved their objectives. And none of that happened. But no, the other Arab and Muslim countries are asleep. They're not going to do anything. The only country that did participate, by the way, at the time was Yemen, of course, because they declared, Yemen said, so Ansarullah in Yemen, they said that if any other Arab or Muslim countries attack, we're happy to participate with them and support them so long as they consider Israel their enemy. But not if they're not going to carry out any action themselves. And they've been doing that, of course, with Gaza. They did continue their attacks when Lebanon was under attack too, and when Iran was having this operation, this response of an operation against Israel. Other countries too, however, it's very unlikely. And thank you so much for that. That's Stephen Kelly. And welcome again, everyone. And also, Stephen, could the Houthis not destroy the Zionist water and electricity? They targeted power stations in areas in Khadera and in south of Israel, Ashdod and Ashkelon. They also targeted strategic places in Haifa too, and in Tel Aviv. And they already shut down Israel's the main southern port, which is the Eilat port, responsible for exports and imports at tremendous levels. So they did manage to do that. They initially stopped operating. Then it later led to them declaring bankruptcy. Later on, they said that the whole company running the operation completely shut down because they can't see how they're going to be able to pay back all of their debts. The Israeli government supported them with approximately 15 million shekels, which is about $4 million or something. That wasn't significant for them. But later on, they had to declare bankruptcy and they had to declare that they're shutting down completely. Jennifer, Mahmoud, the West Bank is being hammered. What do you think will happen to the Palestinians there? Will the ITF try and relocate them too? Well, there was a very dangerous move, like all of their dangerous moves, but this one was a very significant move that was authorized by the Israeli Finance Minister Smotrich, which is the E1 confirmation, a planned building of over 3,000 squatting establishment homes that would basically bury the idea of a Palestinian state on the 1967 borders. Israel already has so many squatting establishments to prevent the establishment of a Palestinian state on the 1967 borders, but this makes it even more difficult. And he outright said this is a response to Western leaders recognizing a Palestinian state. We're going to bury the idea forever on the 1967 borders. In the West Bank overall, this is a greater problem for Israel than Gaza. How? The West Bank has more Palestinian population. And Israel, as a Jewish supremacist ethnocracy that wants a Jewish majority everywhere, they're more concerned about that additional 1 to 1.5 million in the West Bank to the approximately 2 million in Gaza. That's why they continue these terror actions in the West Bank, destroying homes, killing people, splitting areas, building more walls, expanding squatting establishments, destroying Palestinian villages, allowing their rabid dogs to wreak havoc. Their rabid dogs as in the settlers or the squatters, constantly like savages. They go and target and kill people for fun, backed by the Israeli army and with the participation of the Israeli army as a policy, of course. So that's very dangerous. And the fact that they've done that in Gaza proves to you that they are capable of doing that in the West Bank too. So the situation in the West Bank is awful and has been really awful for a very, very long time. The only difference is it wasn't at a level where it was like on the headlines. I mean, even the genocide now is not on the headlines, right? So imagine how things were in the West Bank. Stephen Kelly, do you think Putin will have threatened Trump over Israel and the genocide? I think Putin would have been more worried and concerned about him getting what he wants in Ukraine rather than Israel, to be honest with you. I don't think that Israel and Gaza would have been Putin's main concern, if you ask me. His priority is to change that. However, there have been certain reports that they're trying to link the two ceasefires in the region because there's been information out that Russia was sending intel to Ansarullah about any ship linked to the United States and Israel from a much further distance before it even came close that they can target it. Certain technology that Ansarullah has Russian origins. Certain systems like air defense systems, despite their limited capability, originate from Russia. We know Russia's links with Iran. We know Russia's links with Hezbollah too. And of course with the previous Syrian authorities, but now also with the current Syrian authorities as well. However, his main thing would be to actually achieve a process in Ukraine where Trump would outright confirm and recognize the areas that Russia controls as Russian sovereign territories, including Crimea, parts of East Ukraine too, alongside anything he wants to agree with him. And Mahib, salam brother, he said, what are your thoughts about a civil war breaking between the Lebanon army and Hezbollah? I think it's an option that is not very likely at the moment, because both sides know it will be destructive for Lebanon. So if that happens, you can basically say goodbye to Lebanon as a state. It's going to be destroyed. Hezbollah are very, very strong. The Lebanese army isn't as equipped as Hezbollah. And Hezbollah, they have experience in anything you like: street fighting, urban warfare, guerrilla warfare. The Lebanese army is a police, is a large police force, 70, 80,000. You know, have nothing significant. They haven't lifted a finger against Israel. As a matter of fact, you know, there are opposers that are participating with them, but going into a confrontation with Hezbollah, and primarily due to the corruption of the people on the top. But if they want to go into a direct confrontation, Hezbollah will wipe the floor with them. Not that that's a good situation. No, it should. I don't think it should happen. And I think that you know, reasonable people from both sides will try and reach a solution, and there will be an internal revolution from within the Lebanese army, an army that hasn't lifted a finger against the terrorist state down south, all of a sudden flexing muscles against the only resistance movement targeting Israel. So I hope that doesn't happen. And I hope some people in Lebanon come back to their senses. And there's a very high likelihood that they will, because they know what they would be getting themselves into. And they know that, well, the people who are giving them their orders, they will eventually sell them, like they sold the people before them. And thank you for that. Marvin, if Iran implement True Promise 3, is it feasible Iran will strike squad to establish Gaza, West Bank? Not necessarily, because they don't have anything strategic for Israel. Anything they would attack would probably be mostly in occupied Palestine, 1948 occupied territories. West Bank only if there's something strategic enough to a level where Iran would want to target it. Otherwise, why would they want to waste their energies on that? But I think True Promise 4 will be a much bigger attack than True Promise 3. And True Promise 3 was already a huge destructive attack that still has an impact to this day on Israel, because it confirmed, it strengthened the sense of lack of security in Israel as a whole. The country that portrays itself as a safe haven for the Jewish people and as the only safe place for the Jews to live in, all of a sudden everything is breached. Nothing worked, no air defense system, nothing whatsoever. Despite the fact that they tried their most advanced capabilities and the United States started to chip in, nothing worked, especially when Iran started to release the serious stuff. And again, from reports that we got, Iran, the majority of the weapons that Iran used in True Promise 3 were older weapons that they had to get rid of. We still haven't, they haven't touched some of their weapons, Iran. So in True Promise 4, they're likely to. But in a very calculated and strategic way. Iran doesn't like go all out. They don't like go, release everything, because they know they plan for the long term. They know they might get attacked. They know that, the United States might participate. They need to have a long breath. They know that the campaign might take months or years, and they need to have reserves. They need to have everything that they need to have a proper war of attrition against Israel, because that's where Iran would win, by the way. So this is what I think Iran would do. And they would target even more strategic places, although they did already, by the way. They targeted like the energy sector, the military sector, the military industrial complex, electricity to an extent. They didn't really want to shut down everything. If they wanted to, they would have. Gas off the shores of Israel. What else did they attack? Institutions that teach people, right? Anything like the Weizmann Institute, completely destroyed. So next time, can you just imagine what they would do? And by the way, this is becoming more likely by the minute, because Netanyahu, he lost all of that initial, kick and victory sense after that attack. More and more reports started to come from Israel that it wasn't really that effective. They still have capabilities. And the Israeli authorities, some authorities that are tied with the security establishment with Israel, because it has people who oppose Netanyahu, what they started to do is they started to lift censorship of the real damage that happened in certain locations. And that really humiliated Benjamin Netanyahu. So if he wanted early elections, he is going to have a very difficult time convincing people that I succeeded heavily in Iran. So that's why he needs another attack. Stephen, can you see Iran attack on October the 7th? Well, last year, True Promise 2 happened on October the 1st. So, okay, let's break it down. True Promise 1, April 26th, I believe, something long time, April. 6 months down the line, October the 1st, True Promise 2. Then we had True Promise 3, June 2025. 6-month gap, 8-month gap. That's not necessarily going to say that there's going to be a 10-month gap before the next one. But that October the 1st, the beginning of October, that was a message. They could have something. And listen, they could be preparing a preemptive strike. Who knows? Not that I believe it's in their nature to conduct preemptive strikes. It's not in Iran's nature. But that's something that they definitely have on the table. Saying that, I don't think Israel is going to make them is going to give them a lot of trouble in having a reason. Because I think that Netanyahu is seriously planning another attack in Iran. And I'll tell you why. Do you remember the statements of the Israeli defense minister? He said at the time that now we changed the equation when they attacked Iran. And he said that now we have freedom of movement in the Iranian airspace. And if we entered a new phase, if we see them developing anything, we're going to strike. Now, he made that as an arrogant statement. These people are paper tigers. Did they attack Iran after? They didn't do anything because they knew Iran would annihilate them. But that statement on its own was dangerous. Why? Because he's hinting that something else might pop up. And they're no longer protected. They're no longer shielded. That's why Netanyahu can come up with a certain operation. And listen, it doesn't have to be like all out, because Israel can. What can they do with Iran? They're like almost 50 times their size. With another Iran underneath Iran, by the way. But what Netanyahu could do is another operation that would, target maybe a few more senior leaderships in Iran. Because Netanyahu is stupid. He didn't go into a deal after Iran's attack. That would have made him, more solid. In the eyes of the imbeciles, of course, but you know what I mean. Now all of that, sense of victory faded away. And more people are criticizing. Next time he might carry out an attack, kill a few more people, attack a couple of more sites in Iran, maybe in a bit more of an intense manner with the Israeli Air Force. Maybe more, symbolic establishment hubs. And tell the people, well, look, not only once, but twice. And he's going to tell the people that, well, look, I'm going to do it again. But he would not be able to exactly outline or know how Iran is going to respond. And that's going to be a really big problem. And Marvin, thank you, said, has Sudan been involved in any capacity in helping Hamas? Not to my knowledge, but there have been previous reports about certain, support. But that's over like 15 years ago. But other countries who don't declare anything, they will do things secretly more than anything. And there are some countries that supported the Palestinian resistance without any kind of declaration. When is the election, Mehmet? It's in Israel. The official time is October 26, but the likelihood is that Netanyahu would want to have early elections in 2026. And he would want to have the ceasefire in Gaza somewhere close to that time. He hasn't confirmed it, by the way, but this is what everyone is talking about. And it's not in his favor to extend it up until the October date in 2026. That's going to be problematic for him. And we'll wrap it up there, guys. Thank you so much for tuning in for another live stream, everyone. I'll hopefully have segments for you in either coming hours or the next 24 hours. Thanks to everyone who participated in the chat. Much appreciated. Of course, apologies if I didn't reach all of your comments for the time limit. Everyone who sent supers, Michael, the virus, Michael again, Marvin, thank you so much for that. In the meantime, enjoy the rest of your weekend. Stay blessed, take care, and I will see you soon in the next video. Peace, everyone. Salam.